Hello and welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. Today I'm so excited. We're talking about Lollapalooza. It's the book that everyone has been talking about. If you were alive and cogent in the 90s, you did whatever you could to go see Lollapalooza. I was lucky enough to see the first go-round in 1991, and I think it was at Irvine Meadows, and it was absolutely phenomenal, and I circled my neck so hard to Jane's Addiction to this day. I have lifelong neck injuries from that event. And then, of course, Lollapalooza took off. It took on a life of its own and was really one of the places where some of the most important bands from the 90s cemented their relationship with each other and also with the audience and really became synonymous with what Lollapalooza was intended to be. One of the authors is here, Richard Bienstock. Welcome to Kennedy Saves the World.
Thank you for having me.
So how did you get interested in the subject matter? Is this a book that has been percolating for like a couple decades? How did this come to be?
Well, certainly for a couple of years, I went to the first 3 Lollapaloozas. Okay. I mean, it was sort of like right in my sweet spot. I was, I think, 15.
Oh, my God.
So it was like right entering my like angsty, grungy years, just synced up right away with high school. So, and as just a quick little backstory, my co-author, Tom Beaujour, and I wrote a book previously called Nothing But a Good Time, which was a history of the 80s hard rock industry.
And that, like, I want to talk to you guys about that one day, because that is an incredible scene.
That was a wild book, yeah.
It's one of those things like Latinos in the Democratic Party, you think it's going to go on forever, and then something comes and changes the trajectory, which was grunge, because people
exactly like that.
We all think that metal is just going to go on ad infinitum because there were so many seminal metal bands, but Lollapalooza kind of came to be in the exact moment that all of these bands released their first record.
Yeah, and that book sort of ends with like the crumbling of that 80s hard rock scene by the bands that are in, or supposedly by the bands that are in this book. And a lot of the bands that are in this book, guys like Alice in Chains and Soundgarden, were in our last book as well, at the end of it, sort of talking about that changeover from one era to the next. So in that sense, it seemed like just a smooth transition to go into the 90s. And we wanted to explore the alternative rock explosion, as you will. And Lollapalooza seemed like a great lens to focus that through.
And I remember that show so well in 91, seeing the Rollins band for the first time, because I knew Henry Rollins from Black Flag, and I didn't really know his solo stuff or what to expect, and I was so intrigued by him. And then I saw Nine Inch Nails, and I'd heard a bunch of Nine Inch Nails stuff. I was interning at K-Rock at the time, KROQ in Los Angeles, which factors into the book. And I remember seeing Nine Inch Nails, and I was actually scared of them. There was something about them that scared me, and it was because they'd covered themselves in cornstarch, and they were all like kind of yellow, and that frightened me.
And there's something about seeing that in the daytime as opposed to like a dark, dingy club that is just like, it sort of messes with your brain and your senses a little bit. And plus, they were beating the crap out of each other on stage, and they're throwing beers on each other, and their instruments, they're smashing their instruments, and it's like a whole scene, and it's really like a star-making moment for them.
Yes. Yeah. But there were so many acts who were so influential on each other, and you forget about that until you start going through the book. But what I love about the book, it's an oral history, and it must have been very difficult to pin all of these people down and to sort of jiggle their memories.
Yeah.
But I love, like, Billie Joe Armstrong from Green Day and Danita Sparks from L7 had this hysterical, like, childish friendship where they would just like play pranks on each other and everyone else, and it seems like it would be hard to kind of shock Billie Joe, but she managed to do that.
I mean, L7 are one of the, I think, stars of the book because they're so funny, all of them. Like, they're just freaking hilarious, and they have great stories. So it's not surprising, like, they have great stories with Billie Joe. They have great stories with, like, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
Yes.
But that's one of the things I love about the book, too. And also the last book, when you see, instead of just telling these individual stories, you see all the connections that were made between these artists that you wouldn't even think exist.
Also, like, one moment, and, you get one moment, and I think this is actually really important, and it like, in a way, it brought tears to my eyes. Hannah from Bikini Kill.
Kathleen Hanna.
Kathleen Hanna from Bikini Kill. Like, she was always the hot alternatric. And like she was so sexy, and people were like, there's no way she can possibly be real. I didn't know the backstory she had with Kurt Cobain. And so I remember the fight, and I remember hearing about the fight with Courtney Love. And then I realized, like, holy shit, that was at Lollapalooza. But the best thing about that, like, it's everyone's perspective of that fight. Like, Kathleen talks about it. Eric Erlandson from Hole talks about it. Like, you know, the stage manager talks about it. The promoter talks about it.
Like Pavement and some of the other Sonic Youth.
And,
all
and
these
they
bands,
all, and they all have a relationship with Courtney. And, you know, they all just want to do their jobs. And, you know, it's like they want to have fun, but they don't want to rock the boat. But that was such a line that was crossed for so many people. But they're also like, oh, you know, that's Courtney.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I'll start by saying that's one of the great things about oral history is like you basically have to create this like 360-degree view of what's going on, and then you just drop the reader right in the middle of it. But you can't just have Kathleen Hanna and Courtney Love tell that story, right? What really makes the story come alive is all the witnesses to that story, and like they all have a different idea of what went on. And you put all that together and you just get this like 360 view of the whole thing, and you're just right in the center of it. And I think that's a great thing that we try to do that throughout the book. As far as Courtney, I mean, that happens, that's the first day of that tour. Like that is Lollapalooza day one in 1995. And like
and people have to realize, like, her husband took his own life.
Like she
the year before. This was not that long after Kurt's suicide.
So you can, you know, have your crazy Courtney stories and all that, but like this is also somebody that's in mourning. And it's her tour manager actually that says at one point, you know, nowadays somebody like that, we wouldn't put them out on the road. Like she should not have been out on the road because she's not in the right frame of mind. I mean, clearly there's other things going on, drugs and all these things, but she's a woman in mourning for her husband. Who is also the most famous person in the world, right? So he's like, in 2025, that person, we just treat mental health differently. And that person would not be out on tour.
Yes, and you know, I would like to think that people aren't commoditized like that. But she was also I knew Courtney back then, and she was a very eager participant to all of that. And she wanted to grieve very loudly. She was like Queen Victoria in that way. Like if you go to London, there are 400 monuments to Prince Albert, because she mourned so loudly. And Courtney was the same way with Kurt. And so, but the thing, like, none of that surprised me. You know, it's like people's reactions I thought were very sweet because they knew that she was a mom. They knew that she was in pain. They knew so much of her acting out was a reaction to that. But still, they're still like, you can't hit someone. And Eric is like, I picked up a bag of candy and was like, hey, Courtney, you should give this to Kathleen because, you know, you need to make peace with her. And then that just set Courtney off. But what is wild about it is, and I want you to tell the backstory because I didn't know the backstory between Kathleen Hanna and Kurt Cobain. Like, they weren't romantically involved, but they knew each other very, very well.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, who knows what Courtney thought about whether or not they were romantically, you know, who knows what was really going on.
Why wouldn't he? She was so hot. Like, if you're Kurt Cobain, you know, it's like you look at Kathleen Hanna, you're like, oh my God, does she like me? She's so pretty. And
their relationship predated Courtney. So, like, there's that sort of, you know, uncomfortableness where, you know, like that relationship went back longer than yours did.
She wanted his life to begin when he met her. That's what she wanted. That's what she needed from him.
Right. And you want to know about your significant other's life.
Or that he ever found any other woman intriguing or attractive. But
and there's the origin story of like the Kathleen Hanna was the one that spray painted like Kurt smells like Teen Spirit on like a wall or whatever, and that leads to smells like Teen Spirit.
I never knew that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of history there.
Yes.
That is part of like the mythology.
But
and
that smells like Teen Spirit changed music. And it's like, if she's the author of that, which makes perfect sense because he was a quirky guy and he's like, you know, this will be a nod to Kathleen, who taught him about third wave feminism. Which, you know, it's like, and he was dating Toby in her band before Courtney. And it's such a cool relationship. Like the architecture to, you know, be able to craft that in an oral history and to be able to see that and picture it is just, it is a gift. Like, this book is awesome.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, oral history, it's hard to do, like
Yeah.
it's not because we probably spent the first year just doing interviews and we did over 200 interviews. And then after that, and a lot of that is like the thrill of the chase, right? And figuring out who you need to talk to. And then a lot of these people, you have to like find them, right?
Yes.
They're not easily found. But then at some point you wind up with like 200 interviews.
What is your secret for wearing people down to get them to talk to you?
Just being
Because
really
not everyone can do that.
relentlessly annoying. But no, but also actually the secret is making them understand that you are writing about this stuff because you love this stuff and you lived it, you experienced it. And that's something actually we learned even more with the other book, Nothing But a Good Time, because in that world, all those guys have been treated horribly by the press. These are guys who for 40 years have answered questions about their pink spandex or their big hair and like, didn't you look ridiculous back then? So, but we love that stuff. And so we had to make them understand, like, hey, this is a celebration of
we
what
are
you
not
guys
mocking
did.
you.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes that was hard, but once they understood that, and certainly when they saw the finished product, like, they got it. And so going into this book, it was sort of the, I mean, a lot of these bands have been lauded by the press for, it's a different sort of experience, but I think right off the bat, you have to make them understand that not only do you love this stuff actually, but that you understand it and that you're coming at it from like a really knowledgeable position. And then they're open to talking usually.
Don't go anywhere. More Kennedy Saves the World right after this.
So I want to talk about Perry a little bit and how, was it you who asked me if grunge brought about the death of Jane's Addiction? And was Lollapalooza the eulogy for the band?
Well, it actually literally was in a way. I mean, it was conceived as a Jane's Addiction farewell tour. As far as what brought about the end of the band is probably really themselves. Like there was just a lot of internal fighting and there was a lot of drugs and a lot of other craziness. So they were going to split apart. But yeah, Lollapalooza was conceived as an ending, really, as opposed to a beginning. Like it was a send-off for Jane's Addiction. Yet at the same time, they clearly did not call the tour the Jane's Addiction farewell tour, right? So they knew, like, this could also be a launching pad for something bigger.
Yes. And you felt that. Like, you felt that when you saw it.
Oh, yeah.
And it was so, like, the collection of artists created its own whole. And, with a W. And it was beautiful. Like, and for the whole thing to go from day into night, it was stunning. And then 92... Like, how could you possibly top 92?
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing because, like, the difference from Lollapalooza 91 and Lollapalooza 92 actually is Nevermind. Because Lollapalooza 91 happens and it wraps in August.
Yes, when
The next month...
All those records came out.
Well, yeah, the next month, Nevermind comes out.
Yeah, and the Black Album. And
Bad Motorfinger and Pearl Jam 10.
Mad Motorfinger 10. Yeah, all those records
Blood
came out
Sugar
within
Sex Magic, right?
5
They all
weeks of
come
each
out,
other,
right?
yeah.
But really, it's Nevermind, right? Is like the Big Bang. So like, the first tour happens in a pre-Nevermind world. The second one happens in a post-Nevermind world, and the world's completely different. Like all of these bands are mainstream bands by the second year, and so by the second year, they're already, it's like, has Lollapalooza sold out and blah, blah. And like, they're not really doing anything that different, but the world around them has changed.
Yeah, and I love the foreword by Kim Thayil, who, when I knew him when I was at MTV, he was a prickly pear. When I knew him when I lived in Seattle, he was like the nicest, kindest person.
Yeah.
Because corporate music was such a threat to them. And that was not an act.
Yeah.
And, I remember interviewing Matt Cameron, and he was like, I love my best metal band Grammy. Like, that's the best heavy metal, song or whatever. He's like, that Grammy means so much to me because we considered ourselves to be a heavy metal act.
Right.
And, it's like, and they were so worried that corporate rock meant pop.
Yeah.
And that was like the ultimate, like selling out now is just providence, but like selling out back then was the worst thing you could possibly do.
Absolutely. And that's a good point to pick up on. And one thing I will say also, Kim, we did a book event earlier this week in Seattle, and Kim joined us on stage, and he told story, and he's great.
Yeah.
But the idea of selling out is so like ingrained in the 90s. And I don't know if like younger people today would even understand it because it's such a different world. But like that was like, that trumped everything. Like if you couldn't be a sellout. And like every move you made could signal like sellout.
Yes.
Playing Lollapalooza, you could be a sellout, you know, like if you weren't on the side stage and as opposed to the main stage, like anything you did that was like a grand gesture was like, could ruin you in a way in this world. And like, I don't think that's something that is so specific to that time. And we have a lot of the guys from that time talking about certainly like Sonic Youth and like Flaming Lips guys and Jesus Lizard, all these bands that were, you know, really not ready for primetime players right there, but they all wind up on major labels and they have different experiences doing that. And I think it's like David Yao from Jesus Lizard was like, yeah, you know, Sony signed us to a 3-record deal. And he's like, after the second record, they were like, you can go now.
Yeah.
And we were like, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, like he's like, these bands knew that it wasn't a good fit, but they also knew like this was probably their only shot to even try it.
Yeah.
You know?
And this was, and they all kind of watched each other. It was like, should we sign? Should we do it? Like, are we selling out?
And some people didn't. Like Pavement, where, you know, they talk in the book about having major label discussions, and they didn't do it because they kind of knew like they didn't really work on the main stage of Lollapalooza either.
Yeah.
So they're like, we're not going to work.
But they also
on a
needed
major
to have
label.
a connection with their audience,
Right.
which required smaller venues.
Yeah.
Like they're one of those bands that built their hardcore audience, like touring year after year. And other bands toured, but I respect that because they knew themselves.
Yeah, but nowadays, I mean, the ultimate goal is to get your song in a commercial or in a movie. Like there's no thought about,
Or to be TikTok famous.
Right.
Like have one of your songs be used, you know, and go viral on TikTok. Like that's how, you know, my girls are 15 and 19, and that's how they know so much music.
Right. But the idea that you would like turn down money or turn down a big contract, like that I don't think that that's the way the world works anymore.
Yeah.
And, you know, and not because it's better or worse, but also there's just not as much money around. So like you got to kind of take it.
But Pearl
where
Jam
you can
sells
get it.
out arenas.
Right. But
Like,
they wouldn't if they
to this
started like 2
day.
years ago, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
they were able to sort of stake their reputation on this,
Yes.
you know, and make it work for them.
Oh, it's so fascinating because I really feel like the evolution of Lollapalooza just completely mirrors the evolution of music at that time, which it was innocent because it didn't know its own power. Like it was so uncomfortable with its own reach.
Right.
And you know, that's what was always so funny to me, but they were undeniable. Like you could not turn away from this music and these bands, and you know, even going and discovering some bands on the side stage was like, you know, when you're 15 and you have all the energy in the world and you can stay there all day and see everything, like you never know what's going to change your life.
Yeah, and you feel like you're like being led into like a secret portal, you know, like going in '92 and seeing the Jim Rose Circus on the second stage, like you weren't going to see it anywhere else,
No.
you know, but you felt like you were in the know because you saw this like gross, disgusting, like
Where else are you
insane
going to
thing.
see a guy lift a cinder block with his penis?
There was, I mean, I wasn't seeing that in my Long Island suburb. Like that wasn't happening, you know.
But also in your book, it's so great because you're like, I think it's Kevin, the stage manager, was like, we keep warning people, like, they're going to pass out.
Right.
And then we see, you know, these massive hulking frat guys just dropping like flies whenever they see Jim Rose. And we tell them, well, we got to have paramedics there. And people, like, their brains just were not conditioned for that.
Yeah, but like you're really creating memorable moments, right? Like people who saw that are never going to forget that they saw maybe like Eddie Vedder drink bile that was just pumped out of someone's stomach, you know, and like, and that's, you know, those are magical
And
moments.
he was just climbing up the rafters like he was in an Al Qaeda training video.
So yeah, but you know, and I think like, you know, Eddie Vedder has become such a serious character over you know, personality over the years, but I think you see him as a very young person in this book, and like he is acting like a kid. You know, he's climbing things and he's throwing TVs out of windows. He's getting left behind at truck stops, and like maybe he's going to show up to the show. You know, so it's like you see these people, most of them on the cusp of stardom, and when they're first starting out, and like there's this innocence and like exuberance that comes through on the page, hopefully.
Yes, it absolutely does. It's so wonderful. And the fact that so many people were down to be interviewed and share these stories, these glimpses, like Rage Against the Machine, like telling K-Rock to off. I'm like, you guys are so disingenuous.
Right.
Like, they played a massive K-Rock show in 1992 in like August of 92, like right before I went to MTV. Like, I was leaving K-Rock and going to MTV, and Rage Against the Machine played. And I remember thinking, like, these, like, very few moments in your life where you see something for the first time and you're like, this is going to change everything. Like, these guys are fucking stars.
Yeah.
And then, you know, they go on Lollapalooza and blow everyone's minds.
Yeah, and it's just about the messaging, you know, because, like, look, I mean, everyone's going to do what they need to do, like, to further their career, but, like, you're sort of espousing a certain viewpoint, and, like, the kids are picking up on that,
Yeah.
you know, and, like, and at that time, like, you know, it really was this sort of idealistic time where, like, people believed, like, maybe by listening to this music or, you know, being involved in this culture, like, you could have a larger, you know, effect on the world and on culture and on
Yeah.
politics, and, like, and, you know, and that's sort of a relic of a past time, I think, a little bit too.
So I want to tell you a funny story. Scott Ian from Anthrax loved Rage Against the Machine's music, but he hated the fact that they would put which books to read and, like, the sleeve of the CD, and they would have, like, this liberal catalog of these communistic books that they're trying to shove down kids' throats. And he's like, just play music, man. And it's like, I agree with that, but they really felt like, you know, they had this time, and it was the opposite of selling out would be, you know, sharing their worldview with people that they would never be exposed to in traditional schools.
Yeah, I mean, you have your platform, use it. You know,
Yeah.
it's like that's what you're doing. You know, that's what people do. Like, if you have an audience, tell your audience what you think. You know, and I mean, they can follow you or not, but, like, put it out there.
What is the state of Lollapalooza now? Because for a while it was just in Chicago, and South America. So with the rift in Jane's Addiction, and I can't imagine that they're going to get back together anytime soon, if ever. What is the state of things?
I mean, Lollapalooza is obviously still going strong. I think
Yep.
that it has the standalone festival in the U.S. now. You know, it's obviously not touring, and there's probably like 7 or 8 around the world in different countries. You know, as far as, like, the Jane's Addiction thing, I mean, Perry is still involved in it. Like, it wasn't really ever a band thing
No.
anyway. So, you know, I think that in some ways, like, it has stayed true to what its original purpose was. Like, there always is, like, this very sort of big, like, progressive piece to it. There's a lot of, like, environmentalism. Like, they're really trying to still embrace that side of it. As far as the music that's on it, I mean, it resembles a lot of the other festivals that go on now, right? Like, there's pop, there's R&B, there's hip hop, there's a little bit of rock, and that's kind of what all the festivals do now.
Would there be Coachella without Lollapalooza?
No, well, that's the thing. I mean, Lollapalooza is now just one of many, but that is because of Lollapalooza. The same way in the 90s, it became one of many, which maybe hastened its end, like, because there was Ozfest and there was Warped Tour and there was Horde and there was Lilith Fair. But those only existed because of Lollapalooza. And I think that a lot of these festivals now, like Coachella, and actually in the early days of Coachella, when it was struggling, Lollapalooza organizers helped it along, actually.
Wow.
And Perry helped it along. I mean, and this is just a quick aside, but, like, I think it was 99, Coachella was struggling, and Jane's Addiction actually reunited to headline that year. And that sort of kicked off Coachella's still ongoing thing, where they often highlight, like, a reunion as one of their headliners, and Jane's Addiction was the first one. So Perry and Lollapalooza have a lot to do with Coachella as well. So again, Lollapalooza is one of many standalone festivals now, but a lot of these festivals only exist because of Lollapalooza.
And so many stories only exist because of Lollapalooza, and they are all in here. Lollapalooza, the uncensored story of alternative rock's wildest festival. There it is. Richard Bienstock and Tom Beaujour. Thank you for taking the time. I really, really appreciate this.
Yeah,
and
thank
I
you
would
for
recommend
having
this
me.
to anyone who loves music and wants to relive a slice of their life.
Well, as somebody who was there, thank you for being a part of the book as well and helping us tell the story.
For sure. This is amazing. All right. This has been Kennedy Saves the World, along with Richard Bienstock. I'm Kennedy.
Listen ad-free with the Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.
Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.